Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. It gives me great pleasure to welcome John Bird, who is the founder of a revolutionary magazine called The Big Issue. In September of 1991, he launched The Big Issue along with Gordon Roddick to create a space for homeless people to earn an income again. His interest is to dismantle homelessness. Having been homeless himself, he speaks from the ground of his experience. With a background in printing, he was able to put a totally new paradigm together, which is helping homeless people help themselves. He formed a magazine, but he also formed a foundation to help the homeless during different phases of homelessness, aside from giving them a job. He is adamant about the fact that the homeless should not be treated like pigeons. And he has a lot to say about the distinction between participative and representative democracy. His business paradigm is totally different regarding solving the homelessness problem. Nobody can say it like he can. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome John Bird to It's Rainmaking Time. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed.
Talk to us a little bit about homelessness from your own experience and what led you to start The Big Issue and how The Big Issue is really a paradigm shift in the way homelessness is viewed.
Well, my own personal homelessness was due really to the fact that my mother and father, who had 6 boys just after the Second World War, at a time when really Britain was still recovering from the war, and in fact many people were worse off just after the war than previous to the war. They had a family, they married. We were living in the slummiest part of London, in the highest level of infant mortality in the British Isles, and this was all within 2 or 3 miles of the Houses of Parliament. And where we lived was full of very poor people who had drink problems, not drug problems, there wasn't much drugs around, a lot of drink problems, lots of violence, lots of wife beating, and all things like that, and a lot of malnutrition. And my parents were very much, my father was a local guy, worked in a distillery. All his family had been in the army in the First and Second World War. And he was a man who liked to drink and fight and get into trouble and beat his wife on a Friday night. My mother was an Irish woman who came from Cork, in a place called Mallow, and she'd come over and met this guy and fallen in love. He looked very much like Humphrey Bogart, which obviously is a bit of a plus, especially if you're going to live in a slum. And they got married, and it was totally unsuitable. They were not really meant for each other, even though they ended up with each other, and they didn't have anybody else. But they were just not very good parents. They weren't very good at it. They didn't know how to bring children up. They used violence and over-exaggerated arguments and fighting and all that sort of stuff. And I was the number 3rd child. We were brought up as Catholics. We were also brought up to hate blacks and Jews and Indians and everybody else who wasn't London Irish. So it wasn't just a question of being poor. It was a question of thinking poor. And whenever I have heard stories and read about the dignity of the poor and the tremendous sacrifices that the poor make and the honor of poverty, I could never put that in my mind. So the kind of poverty I came from and the kind of homelessness was, to some extent, the natural outcome of quite a really screwed up take on life. My mother, we were made homeless when I was 5. We had 2 slum rooms in a house that was built for one middle class family that had fallen to pieces, and there were 30 working class families there. And my mother didn't pay the rent. She would rather drink and smoke and died from the terrible conditions that she lived under. She was not a happy woman. I was homeless at 5, 6, and 7, taken in by a Catholic orphanage, Sisters of Charity, and was there for 3 years. Came out of there, got social housing in a different part of London, which wasn't slummy, and then started to get into trouble with the police, and at school. I couldn't read or write, lots of trouble, lots of violence, got involved in a lot of fights, and got put into the correctional system. And from the age of 10 onwards, I was on probation, did short, sharp shocks, did boot camps, did all that kind of stuff. My homelessness was really me running away from home because I just could not stand with great detestation. Couldn't stand the life, couldn't stand the people, couldn't stand the violence, couldn't stand the arbitrary nature of it all. And being uneducated and rather badly treated, I had no answer. There was no way out of it. There was no one to turn to apart from Jesus, which I had this kind of strange attitude. I thought he was my mate. And whenever I got arrested for housebreaking or shoplifting or stealing cars, I always thought Jesus was going to help me. So it was a kind of strange way of thinking. Anyway, left school at 15, had about 9 jobs in the space of a few weeks, and was about to join the army because I'd been a boy soldier. I'd been a cadet, but they refused me because I had these things hanging over me, and then I was given 3 years, put into a kind of penitentiary type place. Got out of that, and then actually had started to paint and draw, and had learned to read in a boys' prison by a prison officer who was an Indian-looking guy, which was extraordinary because, of course, I'd been led to believe that these people were absolute enemies of us, and so I was taught to read and write by a guy giving me a book and saying, "You obviously can't read. Here's a book. Here's a pencil. Underline all the words that you don't know." And we'll talk about it. So over a couple of months, he taught me to read and gave me tremendous confidence. And though it took me another 10, 15 years to get myself sorted out, I was on the road because I could educate myself, and I became a vociferous reader and started to paint and draw and listen to, classical music as well as Elvis Presley, and became fascinated with culture and fascinated by the fact that I kept, this idea of being a painter and all that. So I put in a lot of effort while I was inside. When I got out, when I was 18, I got a place at art school, which was extraordinary because then, 1964, I had no levels, I had no degree paperwork, I had no exams. And I just got in, and they took me in on the merit of my work, and I did very well for a short period of time, but got into more trouble because I started spending all my time chasing girls and getting drunk, and then I ended up as a father at 19. Anyway, the long and the short of it has then followed quite a period in the underworld and doing smash and grabs and stealing money through fraud and all that. And my big turnaround was when I was 21. I had to leave England and I went to France, which was my first trip ever abroad, apart from to Ireland, which we used to go to quite regularly. And I met up with a load of Marxist, Trotskyist, anti-bourgeois people. And when they started to tell me what was wrong with the world, I said, well, it's all those Jews, isn't it? They're the ones, and those black people. And they were absolutely appalled. And they, instead of kind of turning against me, they argued with me. And over a period of time, it was extraordinary. I was transformed from being this little chauvinistic, racist kind of apologist for empire building and chauvinism into a Marxist revolutionary Trotskyist.